So let's take a look at one strong army list for every single faction in Warhammer 40k. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking army lists. In this video I thought we'd do a rather big one, going through all the factions in the game and talking about one army that's done well. Warhammer 40k's last big balance pass happened around about 3 weeks ago now. The balance data slate and all the points changes certainly made some big impacts for the game. Some armies weren't touched quite so much, though for others they either had some big nerfs or certain units get far less overshadowed, and as a result it's pretty interesting to see what people have done and how they've changed their lists in response to it all. At time of recording, there's just been the 2 weeks worth of tournament data, though given one of those weekends was the enormous London Grand Tournament weekend, it does mean that we've had a good amount of data, and there's at least some good examples of high-performing lists for just about every faction out there in the game, the only exception really being Imperial Agents, who very few people play. In this video, I thought we'd just go through and talk about one successful list for each faction, ideally looking for something that's placed in a grand tournament at 4 wins to 1 or better. There are plenty of armies that went 5-0 undefeated or did so for the first 5 games, and for this one, for most of the armies, I thought we'd talk through army lists that I hadn't already mentioned in a previous video on the channel, so have the main focus be on something new for the majority of armies, and then just flash up a couple of the other examples that have done particularly well, such as the top tables for the London Grand Tournament. As ever with these style ones, bear in mind it's just one example of an army that's done well for one given player. It won't necessarily be the only thing that you can do well with a faction, and doesn't mean other units can't be good, but it feels interesting to me to just get an insight as to what one good player has managed to run to some success with an army, and can help for a bit of inspiration. Jumping straight into it, and we'll start with the Imperium and the Space Marines. For the Adeptus Custodes, the higher placings at tournaments seem to have been a fairly even mix between Ultramarines mainly playing Gladius Task Force or the new Raven Guard Shadowmark Talon, and in general it's seeming that Space Marines at the moment are an army that can do pretty well on the top tables, though the average player seems to be struggling with a more normal army list. For one list that did well though, this Ultramarines Gladius Task Force list went undefeated at the London Grand Tournament, with Josh Ferguson's list going 4 wins to 1 draw it would seem. Gladius has generally still been the most popular way to play Space Marines, multiple turns of combat doctrines, adding lots of mobility, reactive moves are powerful, lance in melee and fight in death are both good, and tends to be useful for a good mix of range and melee. It seems the Ultramarines named characters are out in force here. Rebute Gilliman to double down on Oath of Moment, extra powerful when you both get the +1 to wound version of it, you can destroy one target then move on to the next, and also provides some discounted stratagems nearby. And Marnius Calgar is here too. He won't be generating command points as he can't be the Warlord, but is still quite a big and scary threat that's hard to take down with a unit of company heroes for their -1 to wound, quite a nice bully unit that can always advance, shoot and charge. Then interestingly they're joined by Chief Librarian Tigurius in this one. He's quite a nice all-rounder with a bit of shooting, a bit of melee, a bit of defense and some free overwatch, and it seems that he's joining a big unit of Stern Guard here. He can buff them and they can buff him as well, given that they'll confer the full rerolls to hit and wound against his targets. Quite nice with the Storm of the Emperor's Wrath when it's targeting the Oath of Moment. And then for the final HQ, there's a Lieutenant with Fire Discipline. He's leading a big squad of Hellblasters for both lethal and sustained hits on all that general purpose plasma fire. Again, all very nice with Oath of Moment to back it up. Then there's some heavy hitting fire support with 2 Vindicators, strong tanks that can really put the hurt on their equivalents in the enemy army, and again we'll also love the Oath of Moment too. 2 Plasma Inceptors, able to drop in and achieve secondaries a bit more easily with their close deep strike, and Twin Link Plasma Fire can put out a fairly frightening amount of damage as well. Some Intercessors for sticky objectives and their volume fire, and then some Scouts for the infiltrate role and potentially return to reserves if it makes sense. Even if lots of people are jumping aboard the Raven Guard Shadowmark Talon, still seems that Ultramarines have got what it takes to easily make it to the top in a number of different builds. Quite cool to see 2 big buffed infantry blocks with the Hellblasters and Stern Guard here. I feel like they're maybe slightly less common includes versus gun tanks and things. Otherwise for Space Marine lists I've mentioned in previous videos, this one's by Innes Wilson, who used it to place in the top 4 at the London Grand Tournament, going for Stormlance Task Force with the reactive moves and advance and charge on everything. This one has Mass Redemptor Dreadnoughts with Rebute Gilliman to help them with Oath of Moment there I suppose, and a Storm Raven gunship that'll enjoy the -1 to hit and wound stratagem. Finally, lots of Raven Guard lists winging around as well. This one's by John Lennon at the Crucible Grand Tournament, and the vast majority of other high-placing Shadowmark Talons are at least somewhat similar to this. Ethon Shan to coordinate the return to reserves, Devastator Centurions and Inceptors that both enjoy the return to reserves, as well as the other stratagem support, plus 2 big blocks of Vanguard Veterans, one with a first turn rapid ingress arrival if you want it, and one with Kavan Strike for lone operative protection. All very spooky and not hard to see why that's doing well right now. Next up, we've got the Astra Militarum, and this was the highest placing guard list at the London Grand Tournament. Martin Cooper going 4 wins to 1 draw. This one's using the Combined Arms Regiment, so that's the one that gives you the lethal hits against certain targets depending on your own regiment or squadron keywords. Reinforcements to recycle some Kazakin or Tempestus Aquilons or something. Lots of ways to get orders, and fields of fire for some nice boosted AP. As ever with the guard, this one's got some big chunky battle tanks. 2 Dawn commanders, still good despite the small points increase that they got. Lots of general purpose guns there, able to order themselves for all the flexibility, plus also backed up by a single cheap but high threat Lehman Russ Vanquisher. Then fighting for the midboard, there's really quite a lot of chunky infantry, 12 Bullgrin, 1 squad of 6 and 2 squads of 3, really quite tough and able to beat down enemy lighter infantry with their mauls. No less than 4 squads of Katachan jungle fighters for some fairly fast moving high OC units that can skirmish with some flamers, plus some scouting Kazakin as well that can be really quite high damage between their plasma guns, melter guns and mine. They could be a good target for the reinforcements. Commanding things from the backfield, it looks like there's Ursula Creed with Acadian command squad in a shock troop unit. That'll mean that you can order all the regiment units at really quite a long range, and Creed can help out with her stratagems, I guess potentially giving out fields of fire to the Dawn tanks if you want it. Then finally for some skirmish objective utility, there's some infiltrating rattlings, which I'd guess are mainly there just literally to infiltrate and scream back the enemy. 5 Death Riders, I guess mainly here for their reactive move rule, which can make them annoying to deal with. And then Gaunt's Ghosts, who are already pretty strong and now seem very auto-include at 100 points, being able to jump on and off the board and also do some other stuff like issue orders. Interesting to see quite a lot of Bullgrin here. They did get a little cheaper in one of the data slate passes not so very long ago. Certainly seems like there'd be lots to fight for the midboard between them and the Katachans here. Next up, we've got the Adeptus Custodes, and their highest placing list at the London Grand Tournament was this one by Rory Andrew, going a big 5 games undefeated and then losing the 6th. This one's playing with their Lines of the Emperor, easily the most popular one for them. It gives you the big +1 to wound if you're in isolation and not too close to the other Custodes units, some really quite strong enhancements, and then pretty useful stratagems for skirmishing for the midboard, reactive moves to enemy shooting, fallback shoot and charge, a fight on death one, and allowing you to recycle a once per game ability, which is particularly nice on Trajan Valoris. He'll enjoy fighting twice with a moment shackle. Looks like this list has embraced the Custodian Guard in a big way that got cheaper in the last balance pass. Their 4-man squads are just 160 points now, and there's 3 of those, all with spears and then 1 with a shield and Vexilla. It looks like 2 of those will be going with the Allied Inquisitors. There's Inquisitor Draxus, who's very shooty with the Custodian Guard rules with their rerolls and their double shoots, plus can prevent them from being shot at long range, and then a more regular Allied Inquisitor, which is a more unusual pick. I guess being there to recycle some command points, you get to regenerate them on a 3+ for the unit that you've used them on. Then I guess either the Blade Champion or Trajan Valoris goes with the other one, and the last one goes with a squad of 4 Wardens. Feels like it'd be pretty reasonable either way around there. The Blade Champion gets Superior Creation. That's one that allows you to revive on death with 4 wounds remaining, so come back for another go in a serious style. Then there's a shield captain on Dawn Eagle jet bike with Hurricane Bolters. They take Admon Immortus, so extra fighty there, and looks like they'd be joining a unit of 2 Virtus Praetors also with Hurricane Bolters. I'd guess they'd probably go together, though I guess could technically run separately. Then for some skirmishing and objectives, there's 2 sets of 4 Prosecutors and 1 set of 4 Witch Seekers. Generally handy to have some expendable units to do actions while the Golden Guardians get stuck into the enemy. And then providing some fire support, there's 2 Caladius Grav tanks, not benefiting from the detachment rules quite so much, but they are able to provide fire support without being too close to support your other units, so the other things should get the +1 to wound in the midboard more easily. Overall looks like a pretty solid and well-rounded list. Interesting to see the use of the Custodian Guard in a bigger way than before. I feel like we weren't seeing so very many of them versus Wardens previously. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold, who currently have a sale on for their range of magnetic carry cases. This current sale I believe will last till around about the 6th of October. Magnetic storage seems to be the most popular way for people to get their armies from A to B with 40k these days, attaching magnets to the bottom of your bases so you can line them all up on metal trays within a container and they don't rattle around or bang on each other and don't need some more bulky and insulating foam storage to stop them getting damaged. Tabletop Stronghold's take on this is a sturdy MDF box on the outside that is really quite notably hard to break or damage, and then inside that box they have multiple layers worth of steel trays. You can slot them in at different levels to raise or lower them, depending on the height of the models that you're transporting. Then on the front of it there's a clear acrylic sheet, which means that you can see what's where quite easily, and also have your handiwork on display as you're taking it from A to B. Broadly speaking, I've generally heard some pretty positive reviews about them whenever I've seen people talk about them on Reddit or down in the YouTube comments. The cases do seem quite well received. They also do have a competitive terrain set made of MDF as well. That's a little cheaper if you buy it alongside a case, quite a high discount on the bundle set in their current sale. If you'd like to check them out, there'll be links down in the video description below, and I'll cycle back to them briefly at the end of the video to talk through their range of carry cases. Thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Next up, the Sisters of Battle have been having a fairly good time post the balance pass. They were already in a fairly good position before, and then quite a lot of their rivals got nerfed. They actually wound up with a few meaningful buffs as well. In general, it's still mainly the Hallowed Martyrs and Champions of Faith that are the most popular detachments, though it's fun to see someone do well with the Bringers of Flame as well. That's the close-range shooting-focused detachments that people were very focused on when the Codex first came out. Games Workshop gave it a huge amount of nerfs though. You still get the assault keyword, but you only get the +1 strength within 6 inches rather than 12, and then several of the stratagems were toned down a bit, either costing more or not being quite so powerful. There's still some good ones though. They have an Armour of Contempt equivalent, and a +1 to wound if you can jump out of a transport and into that magic 6-inch range. In any case, it looks like this list by Carla Tukia managed to take first and go undefeated at a 48-player grand tournament. Leading the way is Morven Val with her unit of Paragon Warsuits. Massive damage threat here with the multi-melters. They get +1 to hit and wound against enemy vehicles, and Morven Val gives the entire unit re-rolling all hits and wounds. Basically anything they catch in range or melee's got to be in for a pretty bad time. They get on quite well with the Armour of Contempt equivalent in this detachment. Then for the rest, there's a serious amount of on-foot melter fire. There's 3 units of the now cheaper Retributors at 105 points, all decked out with multi-melters. Seems they're adequately strong enough to be topping tournaments again. As well as the points drop, they also got their special rule version boosters. Now they both get their rerolls and the +1 to hit and wound against enemy units that have slain a sister squad, so quite a big deal there. There's also 3 sets of 10 Dominions, all armed with melter guns, and I'd guess that they're probably being split with the Immolators into lots of small squads for skirmishing and objectives. The Dominions get scouts, so you could scout for the Immolators and then do a bit of a manoeuvre with loading them up with Retributors if you wanted to. I'm not sure what the play was here, but it looks interesting. Then there's 3 tiny skirmishing units of Arcoflagellants. They move fast, could screen the enemy or do secondary objectives for minimal investment. And then finally there's not 1 but 3 Castigators with the autocannons. Quite a lot of serious volume fire there to back up the punchy melter fire that could eat up the miracle dice. With the Retributors and Dominions, you could have 1 Castigator potentially spot for the others by marking an enemy unit for extra AP. Overall looks like a pretty focused and scary armoured spearhead for the Sisters. Lots and lots of close-range melter fire here, and quite nice to see as an alternative to the Hallowed Martyrs or Champions of Faith that have been being a bit more tempting previously. As mentioned though, people certainly have been doing well with the others. Here's a Hallowed Martyrs list by Thomas Douche, going first 5 games undefeated at the London Grand Tournament, going really quite a lot more character heavy with Hallowed Martyrs and their character shenanigans that they can do. They're also fitting in room for a unit of Retributors here as well, that do seem to be back with a vengeance. Next up we've got the Grey Knights. And here's a well-performing one from the London Grand Tournament by Nicholas Willingale, going 4 wins to 1 loss. The Grey Knights seem to have been at a fairly strong start for the win rates, though I do wonder if it's maybe a little bit of good luck in the first few weeks. We'll see if it holds. In any case, this list is using the Warpbane Task Force, so the Grotmus focus one. This one gives you rerolls within your zones of control, either within your own deployment zone, if you hold the midfield, or nearby purifiers. There's some other damage buffs for purifiers, and the potential to use purifiers to deliver other squads to a close-range deep strike charge if desired, which could be nice for other purifiers potentially, particularly given that they're really quite strong both at range and in melee. Generally these lists go fairly heavy on them, but this is very heavy on the purifiers. 2 squads of 10 of them, and 1 squad of 5, all armed with psi cannons that will benefit from the detachment rule well, putting out a whole load of psychic shooting damage with the anti-infantry and the high AP with Purifying Flame, and a special rule allows you to fully reroll wound rolls against things on objective markers. Castellan Crow would join one of the big units here. He gives them extra Purifying Flame attacks, so that unit will just be monstrously deadly. Then for heavy lifting against tanks and vehicles, there's no less than 4 Nemesis Dreadknights, 3 Grandmaster pattern ones with their discounted stratagem for one of them, and they're really big rerolls against tanks and monsters in melee. They take Subliminators, so the new Melter Weapons, the Psi Cannon, and the Demon Great Hammer. One of them has the Paragon of Sanctity enhancement, which allows you to basically count 1 unit within hallowed ground once per game, so potentially hand out some rerolls. Then there's one other regular Nemesis Dreadknight, this one swapping out the Subliminator for an Incinerator, and a couple of objective support squads with 1 Strike Marine unit for the sticky objectives, and some fast moving interceptors with their move shoot move. Overall feels like a very focused one, certainly feels like the Purifiers and the Grandmaster Dreadknights are some of the absolute most standout units in the book, and this list goes fairly maximal on them. Otherwise, for another take on the Warpbane Task Force, here's a list by David Ozawa, essentially coming second at the Crucible Grand Tournament, going 6 games to 1. This one's one with really quite a different feel. 3 Brotherhood Librarians for some individual deep strike goodness with some firepower, 2 Razorbacks which get really quite a good debuff rule for units getting out of them. It gets to hit the enemy with extra AP for units disembarking, interestingly enough a Land Raider as well, which I guess might be delivering the Castellan Crow squad of Purifiers to shooting them melee. I can also benefit from the rerolls. Razorbacks genuinely are quite popular in the new codex, though the Land Raider less so. Interesting to see 2 different takes there. Next up we've got the Adeptus Mechanicus. They seem to be having a bit of a moment right now. Finally one of the strongest factions in the game, I think for the first time in 10th edition. Games Workshop helped them out on a few fronts last time, though the biggest thing was Belisarius Call's sort of Oath of Moment style rerolls, giving you huge focal extra damage against marked targets. This list by Ivan Begovic was used to take 24th at the London Grand Tournament, going 5 games to 1 with the first 5 undefeated. The majority of people are using Halo Screed Battleclade. This one's a Skitarii Hunter cohort list, so stealth for a whole bunch for your Skitarii infantry and mounted units. Some good enhancements for marshals, there's 2 of which here, one to be doubling up on doctriners, and then one for move shoot move, which could be good for hopping in and out of transports. And it seems that those 2 are going to be in marshals, I guess joining their units of rangers and vanguards. Otherwise there's some good stratagems, there's a nice feel no pain 5+, an advance and charge, and a +1 to wound if the enemy is isolated, return to reserve, and stopping the opponent shooting at units at long range. Leading the list of course there's Belisarius Call. He's got big stats and nominates that 1 unit for 4 rerolls to hit. There's 2 blocks of infiltrators, 1 squad of 10 and 1 of 5. Generally strong units to be fighting in the mid-board before, and they got buffed taser goads now. 2 sets of Rust Stalkers, again really quite nice for the detachment stratagems. They're taking the Transonic Razor and Cord Claw, so the anti-infantry and damage 2 version, swapping out from the devastating wound one that tended to be more popular previously. They'll quite like advance and charge, and potentially the 5+ feel no pain on one of the big squads. There's lots of Skitarii Skystalkers, which can be good for some actions and objectives, 1 big squad of 10 and then 2 units of 5. A squad of 10 should be able to ping some light infantry really quite hard. There's a big squad of Ironstrider Ballistari with las cannons. There might be an interesting enough option to give the double doctriners to. And then anti-tank firepower is covered with a vengeance with 3 Scorpius Disintegrators with the Ferromite cannons. With them and Belisarius Cause buffs, that's going to be a serious firebase. Overall seems like lots of danger here, and Mech are definitely having a better time of it than they have been having recently. Here's another take on an AdMech list, this one a Halo Screed Battleclade one, so a bit more generalist support, not locked to the Skitarii. This one has a pair of Tech Priest Manipuluses leading a Cataphren Destroyer and Breacher units for their lethal hits and the big buffs. Destroyers certainly seem a lot more interesting now they can get 4 rerolls to hit, and also plenty of Rust Stalkers and some Ironstrider Ballistari here. Next up we've got the Imperial Knights. They've only just had their codex go live on the last weekend, so it was interesting to see what detachments they'd be using. It seems like people have gone for a fair mix of them, though as it seemed likely the Questor's Companions one does seem to have been quite popular. This one's an army list by a Johannes Einamo, who used it to place 3rd at a 40-player tournament, going 4 wins to 1 loss. The Questor's Companions one is the one where you have the core rule that you can get extra oaths and deeds on the go. So potentially both having fast knights and high damage knights from really quite early on if you can do one of your deed targets. They have some really quite powerful enhancements and some good stratagems including an advance and charge in there, a sticky objective with 5 OC and also a +1 to hit and wound enemy monsters, Titanics or Walkers, which won't be relevant every game but when it does that'll be quite a big deal. In the army we've got Canis Rex, the character knight with the discounted stratagems, still pretty excellent despite a damage cut in the codex. Then a Cerastus Knight Lancer with the Herald of Triumph, that forces a battle shock test on the opponent which I guess could occasionally prevent a stratagem or something, maybe doesn't feel like the single most useful though. There's a 2nd Knight Lancer with the much better enhancements, the Pennant of Silvered Fury, getting you sustained hits 2 once per game, and then if you get one of the deed things done, then you get to get it again. That's a pretty massive melee buff, particularly on such a fast knight that can advance and charge here. And then there's Knight Paladin that got improved with extra AP against the closest target on its battle cannon now. This one takes the Wormslayer Divination for 10 points. This allows you to reroll hit rolls against fly things once per game, again potentially having the chance to refresh it. For 10 points that feels reasonable enough. Then there's 2 Armored Warglaives with Stobbers, maybe nice to have at least some units that will be a bit more expendable, and a Calidus Assassin to bounce around the board doing lone operative things and getting objectives. In any case, cool to see a first take on what's doing well for the Knights. Otherwise, here's another detachment in action with the Spearhead at Arms. This was the highest placing one at the London Grand Tournament, with Dom Ridley's list going 5 games undefeated and then losing the 6th. The Spearhead at Arms is the one that allows you to buff multiple armigers with your Bondsman abilities. The Knight Castigator's a particularly nice one and commands some absolutely terrifying firepower with the Helverins. There's multiple stratagems that can help them shoot harder as well. And then there's one of the new Knight Defenders, which I'd guess might be buffing the Armiger Warglaves, giving them -1 damage and then making them a pain to deal with when they move up to the mid-board to fight for objectives. Next up, we've got the Imperial Agents. As you might expect, with them being Warhammer on extra hard mode, they haven't had a good placing recently post-data slate yet, and are still waiting for whatever major changes they get to the Deathwatch veterans with their new kits. For impressive performances in recent times with them though, this list by Matt Stadnick was used to take third at a tournament called Ragnarok GT, really quite impressively going 5-1 against a field of 74 players. I would bear in mind that this was with pre-nerf Canis Rex, who will be adding a lot more power to the army than post the Knight Codex, so you wouldn't be able to field a list quite as powerful as this one very directly now. For the rest of the support beyond the Knight though, they're using Imperialis Fleet, so the one where you mark one target for some extra damage or mark an objective to help you survive there, and then have some nice stratagems and options to allow you to infiltrate and deep strike things. It looks like there's the clandestine operation to infiltrate some units here, which could be nice both on the chaff units and potentially the damage dealers too. And quite a powerful reactive move stratagem after you've got shot. Beyond the Knight, there's 3 big units of Subductor squads, really quite tanky RBTs that's likely to take more than their points cost for the opponents to take down in any one turn. 2 big and scary Deathwatch kill teams, one of them spec'd a bit more for shooting than melee with Infernus heavy bolters alongside frag cannons, one of them just frag cannons, and all of them maxing out on the Thunderhammers. It seems that both of them are led by the Watchmaster for advanced shoot and charge, and potentially some free stratagems. I'd guess they'll be jumping out of the Rhinos there. Then there's Captain Artemis, which I guess would go along on his own, given that he revives on a 2+, so going to be quite handy as a skirmish unit there. There's one squad of Navy Breachers, who potentially could join the Road Trader entourage and infiltrate if they'd like to. A Calidus Assassin for some objective support, and a Navigator for denying some deep strike. I guess he might well go on his own and just guard the backfield as a solo character. In any case, very, very impressive to get any success with the Imperial Agents, given Games Workshop's neglect of balancing them. Going 5-1 in a grand tournament is very impressive. Next up, we've got the Sons of Sanguinius. The Blood Angels doing fairly well so far post-data slate. This list's an Angelic Inheritors one, so maybe the slightly lesser played of their 2 main detachments. Your very character-focused one, where you get some rerolls for character-joined units, plus some really quite big damage dealer stratagems, and preventing units getting shot. This list by Jordan Techley was used to place high at the London Grand Tournament, going 4 wins to 1 draw. In the last update, Blood Angels had their changes to the Sanguinary Guard. They're now hit on a 2+ when they were a 3 before. The lance profile on them got buffed, but they also cost more accordingly too. And the weapon skill 2+ often means they don't really synergize quite so well with Dante, but it seems that hasn't been enough to stop them in the Angelic Inheritors, given that he adds other things here due to being a character in a unit in the first place. He still boosts their threat range and is really quite fighty on the charge. Seems that he'd go with one squad and then the other 2 will be joined by jump captains. They're equipped with Fist and Hand Flamer and can discount those nice stratagems, and one of them takes the Blazing Icon, a big 20-point upgrade, but one that turns off Overwatch, so you can pretty well guarantee that they're getting into the fight. Then there's Lamatis leading a big squad of 10 Jump Death Company. They're going to be a pretty brutal melee damage unit there, with Lamatis giving them some lethal hits and making them a touch tougher on the hit back as well with the -1 damage. There's the fight's first lone operative that is the Sanguinor. Depending on the matchup, he could set up off the board and threaten to do his heroic intervention trick. And then there's a combi weapon lieutenant taking Ordained Sacrifice. That's an upgrade that allows him to revive on death, so just in case that guy wasn't hard enough to kill already, he's just going to come straight back after you've killed him the first time. Then finally there's a pair of Ballistus Dreadnoughts for some Blood Angels firepower. One squad of Infiltrators to deny some deep strike in the home field. Scouts are screening into the mid-board and keeping back enemy scouts or infiltrators of their own. And then Jump Intercessors, which are rarely bad choices for Space Marine armies and certainly fit the theme well enough with Blood Angels or bully other enemy equivalent units. Overall looks like a pretty solid and scary looking Blood Angels list, 4 enormous melee threats and plenty of other units that can hit quite hard as well, backed up by a bit of sturdy firepower with inbuilt rerolls. Here's a take on the Liberator Assault Group, which is their slightly more commonly played army. This list going 5-0 at the Doonhammer Open, I had already mentioned on the channel. A fair few similar choices here, though no Dante for the Sanguinary Guard. Looks like they've got a jump captain instead, and they've got the Rage Fueled Warrior combo for a captain on foot. That should be pretty devastating alongside some Assault Intercessors. Next up, we've got the Dark Angels, and their last balance changes have both the Lion and some of their unique Ravenwing land speeders improved, all of which seem to have made it into this list by J. Seaburn, using it to take 13th at the London Grand Tournament. Seems that here they're using a Gladius Task Force list. Wrath of the Rock has often been the most popular, but doesn't necessarily seem to be the best at actually topping tournaments. Gladius is just pretty generally helpful with its movement and damage style rules, plus support for range and melee. Leading the list we have the Primarch himself in Lionel Johnson, now able to take 2 of his abilities, so buff units nearby, and either defend against mortal wounds or return to reserves. He's always tough to deal with as a particularly fighty and hard to kill fights first unit, so melee armies are really going to struggle there. Then there's Azrael with a big unit of Inner Circle companions. They'll really enjoy his 4+ invulnerable save. He can rustle up a few command points in the early game, then commit to the fight. They'll have some pretty massive damage with their general purpose profiles, and they could be a good choice for the Lance stratagem in Gladius. There's 2 big chunky units of Deathwing Knights. It's rare to see Dark Angels lists without these. They take the maces and great weapons, and with their -1 damage and 4 wounds, they're enormously tough to take down, and will also be able to wipe out the majority of threats that they can charge. There's some objective and skirmishing support, the ever-present Combi Lieutenant for a cheap lone operative that you can't catch up with, 2 units of scouts to infiltrate into the midboard for this one, and then the rest of the list has some interesting and quite fun and different support. There's 2 Ravenwing Landspeeder Vengeances with the boosted damage on their plasma weapons. Games Workshop finally got around to restoring them to damage 3 on the overcharge profile, and that seems to have been enough to tip the balance into being an okay damage dealer once again. There's a Stormspear Thunderstrike that looks like it'll be marking targets for them, getting them to be +1 to wound against tanks and vehicles, which with twin linked should make them very general purpose against tough stuff. There's a Ravenwing Darkshroud for stealth and the benefit of cover for units nearby. I'm not sure if the plan is to support the other fast moving things there or to help out the Deathwing Knights. Both could be helpful. And then finally there's a Whirlwind for some out of line of sight firepower, which could be fairly nice for using Oath of Moment with. Pretty interesting to see a list that goes really heavy on all the stuff that got buffed last time around. I guess that definitely shows that the Landspeeder Vengeance and the Dark Shroud have got strong enough to include in top tier armies once again. Next up, we've got the Black Templars, and here's a Gladius task force at the London Grand Tournament played by Lewis Archer, this one going 4 games to 1. Gladius Task Force is the Templar detachment that's seen by far the most play now. It just supports their melee a lot better than the other weirdly keyword locked ones. Advance and charge is really quite a big deal there, and the other stuff is helpful to various different units. They generally have permanent +1 to wound against tough stuff in melee from their Templar vows. Sword Brethren have tended to be the order of the day for the Black Templars, and there are 3 squads of 4 of them here with mastercrafted power weapons. It looks like at least some of them might be doing the combo with the Castellan and the Marshal, re-rolling all hits from the Castellan, and then the Marshal giving you lethal hits on a 5+. So you get quite an enormous amount of mastercrafted power weapons that auto-wound the enemy, and then the ones that don't are still +1 to wound. There's only enough for 2 to do that though, and then there's an extra unit of Sword Brethren, and then a big Crusader squad. Interesting to see the Crusaders here. I feel like they've been far lesser taken, particularly in the 20-man version where you pay an excess points tax for taking them there. I'd guess they probably have a character in them. I don't know if they'd go with the Judas here to allow them to fight first if the opponent tries to fight them. I guess that could be quite a big deal for them if they decided to use their surge move into something, so they'd be able to fight first into the enemy. Then there's an Emperor Champion with the Honor Vehement, which I guess could either join the last squad or go as a solo lone operative. 2 squads of Jump Intercessors, which the Templars will get on very well with their +1 to wound. Some Intercessors for sticky objectives, Scouts for holding the midboard, and then some very scary sturdy firepower with the Templar Repulsor Executioners, getting a free multi-melter and inbuilt rerolls against everything that's sort of close to Templar units. Pretty easily the best firepower that they can access. Interesting to see a different take on the Templar Gladius, and cool to see some good success with a Crusader squad here. The highest placing Templar list at the London Grand Tournament though was this one by David Gaylard, placing in the top 8 and going 7 games undefeated before losing the 8th. This one's got several similar combos but has Grimaldus in here, who I'd guess would go with the Assault Intercessors. Really quite a general purpose fighter unit between their rerolls and his buffs there. Next up we've got the Space Wolves, and one list that did well at the London Grand Tournament was this one by John Hamer, going 4 wins to 1 loss. The Space Wolves have been sort of upper mid for win rates prior to the balance updates, though got a few nerfs to some of their better characters, often using the Saga of the Beast Slayer, but this one's Gladius Task Force once again. Again, nice and general purpose between reactive moves and its various advance and charge or other advance and damage things. I quite enjoyed the Lance and extra AP melee stratagem too. Here we've got basically the entire cast of some of the better Space Wolf characters. Logan Grimnar can join Terminators and get a squad to Deep Strike turn 1. Ayak Rockfist is a pretty brutal fighty champion character. Looks like they're both leading a Wolfguard Terminator unit, and they're just overall very mighty with plenty of damage and lots of defense with a -1 to wound and 4 wounds with Storm Shields. Then there's Ragnar Blackmane, who I'd guess will be joining the squad of 10 Blood Claws here, though he could go with the Head Takers I guess. With the Blood Claws, you could get some big wound rerolls on the go for him. I guess that probably the Wolfguard Battle Leader would go with the Head Takers, giving them the sustained hits and rerolls in close combat with some pretty brutal paired close combat weapons. Then there's Beyond the Fell-Handed, rustling up some command points and being a pretty sturdy dreadnought. An Iron Priest is here despite the nerf. He gives just one weapon the rapid fire rule, which still seems to be good enough to justify a Gladiator Lancer, it would seem. So that's to be getting 3 shots out of the main laser destroyer rather than 2. For a couple of fast-moving skirmish threats, there's a squad of Thunderwolves with the Storm Shields despite the higher points cost, and a squad of Hammer and Shield Wolfen with the Death Totem. They'll have some objective control only if they can stay within range of characters, and then for board control and objectives, there's a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, 2 sets of Wolves, 1 squad of 3 Hunting Wolves, and then 1 squad of 5 regular Fenrisian Wolves, 5 Intercessors for their sticky objectives, and Scouts to claim the midboard. Those Terminators certainly seem super intimidating in that one, a big squad of 10 of them that could be starting in the midboard turn 1 if you wanted to, with Logan's Deep Strike. That's certainly going to be enough to put the opponent under loads of pressure really early. It's quite cool to see the Iron Priest and Gladiator Lancer combo as well. It does seem like the single tank that could justify him the best. Finally for the Imperium we have the Deathwatch. Not many people have been playing them, but they have been doing pretty well so far post-update. I feel like they were already interesting enough, if not having great performance prior to the balance pass, and they got big decreases on a whole bunch of kill teams, many of which were already good before. This list by Jean-Louis van Niekerk was used to take second at a tournament called SA Nationals 2025, going undefeated with 4 wins and 1 draw. It's using the Deathwatch Black Spear Task Force, so that's the multiple turns worth of damage buffs that you can flex into later. The multiple special issue ammo stratagems, plus the teleportarium to be able to warp units around the board, really meaningful with big kill teams that you can activate stratagems on multiple for. Perhaps one of the most interesting things here, the choice of kill teams. There's 2 units of the now cheaper Fortis kill team, so that's the standard Intercessor style one. They take a good mix of different gear, a Pyro-Blaster, a grenade launcher, 1 Super Crack and 1 Vengor launcher from the Desolation Marines, and then 4 with Plasma Incinerators. It seems that at 180 points they're enough to make the cut after the points drop. From the characters it looks like one of those units will be joined by a Watchmaster for the discounted stratagems, an Advanced Shoot and Charge if you need it. And then for the other big kill team threats, there's an Indomitor kill team, the big chunky Gravis one that was already great and then dropped down a bit. They have lots of Flamestorm shots and Eradicator fire with extra strength. There's a Gravis captain leading them with the fighting melee enhancement with the Thief of Secrets. And then finally there's a Deathwatch veteran unit, this one with Infernus Heavy Bolters, Max Thunderhammers and otherwise specs for melee. Feels like the Judas Ear would be the sensible one to go with there, giving them fights first on all those fighty profiles. It seems there's also a Lieutenant as well, who I guess would join a Fortis kill team. Then for some firepower, there's a Repulsor Executioner with a Laser Destroyer, and 2 Storm Speeders with a Hail Strike for extra AP against infantry, and a Hammer Strike for ignores cover. Interesting to see the Hail Strike there, I've not seen that used very much. And then these Space Marine Objective Support style units, Intercessors with sticky objectives, Incursors to mark a target for +1 to hit, Infiltrators that can deny some deep strike or infiltrate into the midboard, and the ever-present Combi Lieutenant for his skirmishing. It's pretty fun to see the Fortis kill teams with this one. Looks like a points drop has been enough to get them back into contention with the rest. Otherwise, here's another Deathwatch list at the London Grand Tournament going undefeated by an Alasia Gola. This one's got a whole bunch of similar kind of choices, not going for Fortis kill teams this time though, and instead of them having an extra Indomitor one and having a Spectrus kill team, and rather than the Storm Speeders and Fire support, there's a couple of squads of Deathwatch Terminators too. Moving on to the Forces of Chaos next, and one of the most notable high placing lists was this Chaos Cult list, run by Martin van der Most, and going undefeated to win the Phoenix GT. Chaos Cult is the Chaos detachment that just seems to every so often do super well at a top level, mainly providing really quite big movement boosts to the damned keyword units. It can be nice for board control for their cheaper squads, though the majority of the detachment supports the Accursed Cultists the best. Big blobs of at least somewhat durable cultists with a bunch of melee profiles that can hit really quite hard with dark packs, plus the various different ways that you can amp up their damage in this one. As a result, unsurprisingly, there's 3 sets of them with 3 dark communes, having a 5+ invulnerable save for each of them, and getting a big turn of advance and charge with extra damage, and each of those takes a good buffing enhancement, rerolling advances and charges, extra damage buffs as the unit takes damage, and allowing them to scout even if they've got an attached unit. All of those are super dangerous and get across the board really quick, and particularly with their surge moves. Otherwise, there's 4 regular cultist mobs for some screening and scoring, and they can also use the detachment synergies. There's a Terminator Sorcerer, Deep Strike alone, and he can improve AP against one given target, which I think will be really quite important for the Accursed Cultists. They've got loads of slightly low AP attacks, so getting some extra AP against their chosen target for them to destroy is a big deal. There's really quite a punchy firebase with 2 Predator Annihilators and 2 Predator Destructors, all with las cannon sponsons, and should be able to reach out and hurt the things that the Accursed Cultists can't deal with so well. The fighty lone operative that is Cypher, who makes an appearance in loads of Chaos lists, and 2 cheap and fast moving squads of Raptors that could do secondary objectives, while also having a bit of damage threat between Power Fists and their Melter Guns. Definitely a bit more of an unusual build for Chaos Space Marines, far more using Renegade Raiders at the moment, or maybe Pact-bound Zealots, and still shows that the Chaos Cult can be doing well and catching people by surprise, even with a further nerf to the Dark Commune that they got in the last balance pass. Of course, Chaos Space Marines also had a massive win at the London Grand Tournament as well by Liam VSL, a big 10-0 win streak against some of the very best players around in Warhammer 40k, and getting style points for using a very similar detachment to last time around. Veterans of the Long War with some big reactive moves and big rerolls, and a whole mix of different damage threats, well able to respond to enemy armies between Predators, Obliterators, Warp Talons, Chosen, and allying in some Noise Marines from the Emperor's Children too. I talked about a few of the units used in its own video if you wanted to check that one out. Next up, we've got the Festering Forces of the Death Guard. They still seem to have been doing okay since the balance pass. They're obviously not as standout as they were before the big points nerfs. This list by Caleb Langholz took 21st at the LGT, going first 5 games undefeated. This one's a Virulent Vectorium list, so the more standard Death Guard play company, giving everything sticky objectives and having some nice supporting stratagems, such as the -1 damage in melee for Disgustingly Resilience. Beat Spore Eruption could potentially help out Mortarion as well, and a fairly big shooting one for Death Guard Infantry. It also has nice enhancements for supporting the characters too, 2 options to make Lords of Contagion fightier, including one here with the Demon weapon, and then a Revolting Regeneration for a Feel No Pain for the Demon Prince of Nurgle, making him very tanky indeed between his Toughness 12 and Lone Operative Protection when he's near some infantry. He'll support some of the rest of the list with some discounted stratagems too when they're nearby. The list is headed by Mortarion himself. He felt like he rose up the rankings for the Death Guard a bit, given the nerfs to a lot of the rest of their staples. 380 points for a whole bunch of damage and defense, a nice mortal wound aura, and some pretty interesting reactive mechanics. There's 2 Lords of Contagion, as mentioned one with the Demon weapon, and there with 2 squads of Death Shroud Terminators. The idea would be to make a unit afflicted, and then you can get a 6-inch charge on them. Pretty powerful to get that amount of melee into close combat quite so reliably. There's a great big hard-hitting Plague Marine combo in a Rhino. They're taking a Biologist Putrefier and a Malignant Plague Caster, and that gives the combined units between shooting and melee probably enough damage to one round the vast majority of threats in Warhammer 40k. They get buff some Contagions, the Rhino, and both of the characters with the sustained and lethal hits going off on a 5+, never mind their own actual damage, and the Plague Caster's got quite a bit of it. There's 2 Bloat Drones with the heavy blight launchers for some fairly chunky strength 10 damage 3 firepower, again helped out with Contagions for extra AP perhaps, and then 3 units of 10 Poxwalkers, really nice at infiltrating into the midboard and making sure that things get into affliction range early. The vast majority of Death Guard staples still seem to be all very scary. It does mean that you have far less models on the board than some factions now, just due to how many points they went up by though. Next up, we've got the Thousand Sons. They've been having more trouble since the balance pass. After some fairly heavy hitting nerfs, it looks like their win rates are down to some of the lowest of 40k, at least on the first few weeks, dropping down from previously being one of the very strongest factions in the game. There haven't been loads of players either putting them on the table or doing well if they're doing so, but one of the best performing lists was this one by Brett Smith, who went 4-1 at the London Grand Tournament, the first 4 games undefeated. The Thousand Sons get their 4 powerful Kabbalistic rituals, and then they're using the Grand Coven once again here. That's the one that helps out in a big way with several turns worth of buffs for their magical firepower, and good stratagems that help out Magnus in particular, with either big rerolls for psychic damage, blankier damage for a failed save, or allowing you to reroll Kabbalistic rituals that failed, which might be even more important if you can't recast them with another Psyker now. Leading the list is Magnus himself. He has big hitting damage, 2 rituals that he can cast slightly more reliably, and might be hard to kill between his -1 damage and blanking damage in this detachment, and as usual he's backed up with a good number of Rubric Marines led by Sorcerers, 2 Infernal Masters, one with the Eldritch Vortex of a Taff going up to +1 damage, and one with the Umbralific Crystal to warp a squad around the board. Then there's a regular Sorcerer leading another unit. It seems that 10 of the Rubrics and either 1 or 2 of the characters will get transported in the Chaos Rhino. The one with the Umbralific Crystal is likely to be outside and he's going to go teleporting by himself with a Rubric squad. By the way, you're going to have a lot of magical firepower getting to its targets. The Rubric Marines with their Warp Flavors and Soul Reaper cannons are very dangerous as well, and bring some inbuilt rerolls against things on objective markers. Between them, the characters, and the Kabbalistic ritual buffs that you can get a pretty enormous amount of damage out of them. Then there's 2 Mutalith Vortex Beasts, still making the cut despite an increased points cost. They have some powerful firepower and can help out with Kabbalistic rituals if you harness the warp. And then for skirmish, screening and scoring units, there's 2 sets of 2 Spawn. 2 sets of 3 Zangor Enlightened with the great bows, not being spammed quite so much in lieu of the big point striders they got, and then 2 units of the Zangors that can scout up the board and also fade away to return to reserves. So plenty of small expendable units for objective purposes there. Good to see a solid placing with 1,000 Suns. Doesn't really feel like the main theme of this one has changed too much compared with pre-nerfs, just obviously getting a bit less stuff, and previously they would have likely been far more Zangor Enlightened, maybe lots of squads of 6 of them. Next up we've got the Emperor's Children, the fast-moving Chaos Marines of Slaanesh. This list by Marco Santopadre took 9th at the London Grand Tournament, going 6 games to 1 with the first 6 undefeated, so a pretty massively impressive record there. Their last balance changes have Fulgrim very slightly buffed, and the Flawless Blades get quite a big buff with an extra attack each. I've seen some lists use those, but this one feels like a fairly cookie cutter style one from prior to the update, using the Coterie of the Conceited. That's the detachment where you can make some pledges to Slaanesh, get kills for successive damage buffs to stack towards the end of the game, and at least it's fairly easy to unlock some big rerolls of rerolls 1 to hit and wounds. There's also some nice enough melee support stratagems too. Here there's 2 Winged Demon Princes with their big mortal wound impact hits and are fairly mighty to take down. One has Unholy Fortune for the chance to auto-pass some saves or plug it into damage. Then there's 3 squads of Lord Exultum plus 5 Infractors. They move fast and scout. The Infractors bring lots of rerolls against things that are on midfield objectives, and the Lord Exultum brings some lethal hits and a whole bunch of quality attacks with Lance. Between that, the detachment buffs, and a big once per game damage buff for the Lord Exultant, they can be really quite a big threat just for a cheap investment that moves quite fast. Then there's a whole bunch of hard-hitting sonic firepower, 3 sets of 6 Noise Marines with Blastmasters and Sonic Blasters. It looks like at least a good chunk of those might be jumping out of Chaos Rhinos. There's 3 of those here, and you could potentially have them scout up with Infractors, and then have Noise Marines pile into them after doing that. There's a set of fast-moving and expendable Chaos Spawn, 2 sets of Tormentors, 1 to maybe start in the mid-board, and 1 in the home field for sticky objectives perhaps. Pretty auto-include to at least have some small squads of them, and then Lucius the Eternal, who will be keeping the Warlord safe between his lone operative and his good defensive profile surviving into the late game, and maybe committing with some damage later on. Overall, still seems that Emperor's Children are in a very good place with their previous staples. It seems that the other Emperor's Children list that placed higher at the London Grand Tournament went for a very similar build as well. Just a few things traded out with 1 less Rhino, dropping some Spawn and an enhancement, but getting a Lord Cacophonist and some Flawless Blades in there. Seems to manage to miss the Flawless Blades in the first time I talked about this one, so apologies for that. Nice to see one of the buffed units get a good placing here. Next up, we've got the World Eaters, who seem to have had a very strong start since the balance update. With the changes that they got, they've had a lot of people jump into playing them again, and somehow have shot up to be the single most played competitive faction for a week or two, which I wouldn't necessarily have seen coming. Their balance updates had nerfs to Spawn, Forge Fiends, and Khan the Betrayer, but also some big buffs to 8-bound as well. Though interestingly enough, it also looks like 20 strong Khorne Berserkers have come into fashion in a big way, and the majority of competitive lists are going really quite heavy in Khorne Berserkers indeed. This list by Innes Wilson, who used it to take first at the Dunehammer Open and go 7-0, was one of them. This one's got a fairly crazy 50 Khorne Berserkers on the board, 2 big squads of 20 of them, I guess led by those Juggernaut Lords for a lot of extra threat range. One has Battle Lust for some rerolls to charge, and because they're in the Berserker Warband, there's a 1 command point stratagem to advance and charge, and they can automatically Blood Surge the full 8 inches if they'd like to, so guarantee getting into melee with something within 9 if it makes sense. Then there's a smaller unit of Khorne Berserkers with Khan the Betrayer jumping out of a Rhino. Khan takes them to the next level with some quality damage 3 attacks, plus all the rerolls, and he might be quite a nice one to use the extra AP stratagem on with a bunch of sort of mid-AP attacks. Then there's 2 units of the Exalted 8-bound. They get damage 3 against monsters and vehicles now, and got far cheaper. They could potentially be delivered by Deep Strike and Rapid Ingress if it made sense, and seems that one squad's joined by a Slaughterbound with the Berserker Glaive. He has a pretty monstrous amount of damage on his boosted turn in particular, all at damage 3, or I guess going up to damage 4 against monsters and vehicles while he's in an Exalted squad. Then there's some Jackals for sticky objectives, and then Spawn are pretty ubiquitous as well. 3 squads of 2 of them scouting forward and being nice trading pieces where they can bully other similar units rather well while moving incredibly fast with advance and charge, and requiring more than a bit of incidental damage to take down. Pretty much all the World Eaters melee things are terrifying here, from the 8-bound to Khan's unit, though those big squads of 20 strong Berserkers seem super intimidating. Loads of carnage that might be hard to shoot down given the surge moves that they can get. Here's another take on the Berserker Warband, this one by Michael Hooper, who used it to win Icehammer GT. This one is a rare list that doesn't take Khan the Betrayer, the vast majority do, instead having a Demon Prince with the Berserker Glaive, and this one going heavy on the Forge Fiends and 8-bound for the main damage dealers, 2 sets of 3 of each flavour of 8-bound, a Juggernaut Lord with a big squad of 20, and then some Jackals, Goremongers and Spawn to support. Next up, for the Chaos Forces, we've got the Chaos Knights and their Infernal Lance. They had points nerfs in the not so very distant past, and also some rules nerfs in the balance pass, though I felt like not unsurmountable ones. It seems that more recently they've tended to pivot more fully to the Infernal Lance. Not quite so many people playing the Lords of Dread as prior to their nerfs. Infernal Lance still seems to be doing very well for them. You can flex into extra damage with some lethal hits on demand if wanted, and often it will be wanted for the Knight Despoiler with the dual Gatling cannons, or get extra defense or extra speed, and I've got useful stratagems including the Diabolic Bulwark, or being able to ignore cover at range. The dual Gatling Despoiler feels like the central unit here, still absolutely excellent, and a murderous gun turret for loads of damage output, having 36 shots at strength 6 and damage 2. You can get sustained hits on them against enemy light stuff, and then against tough stuff get lethal hits, so they're genuinely really quite good damage output against tanks as well. One of the two that are here takes bestial aspects to allow you to have the assault keyword, so an extra fast moving gun turret there. Then there's a Knight Rampager that takes the Knight Diabolus enhancement. That means that he gains the Lance keyword when he's using Diabolic power, and will be pretty much immune to negative modifiers to hit as well. Really quite scary melee danger there, and he could be somewhat tricky to kill on a counter charge with an Armour of Contempt equivalent. There's 3 of the still very efficient War Dog Carnivores. They move fast and hit very hard in melee, and have some further options for boosted movement and things in this detachment. And then this one goes very heavy on the allied demon support. 3 individual Beasts of Nurgle. Quite nice, very tough and expendable units that can do secondaries. 2 squads of 3 screening Nurglings, and then 1 squad of Plague Bearers that can bring the sticky objectives to the game. Likely a good choice for guarding a home field point. Overall still seems that the Spiky Knights are in the running, though it does feel like they're pretty convergent to Infernal Lance now, and lots of those lists going very heavy on the dual Gatling Despoilers. Speaking of which, there was also this one by Nicholas Frericks that was used to take the Monsterland Major Tournament, and this one goes pure Chaos Knights rather than adding in Demons, adding in 3 Scouting Wardog Stalkers to the mix, and subbing out the Rampager for yet another Knight Despoiler. It's fairly safe to say that this one's going to have enough Gatling Cannon bullets to handle just about everything. Then finally for the Forces of Chaos we have the Demons. They seem to have been doing pretty solidly and are fairly strong at the moment. Most people now choosing to go for the Demonic Incursion rather than the Shadow Legion, which has fallen out of favour a bit. That's the one that boosts your Shadow of Chaos and allows you to close deep strike there, plus has some interesting shenanigans for return to reserves and the really powerful enhancements for the Greater Demons. This list by a Nicholas Schmidt was used to take first at a small tournament called Nordcon. While I feel like lots of Chaos Demon lists maybe take something like 4 or 5 Greater Demons, this one goes to the absolute max with 6 of them. There's Be'lakor to lead the way, with turning off enemy shooting and his Aura of Shadow of Chaos, a Bloodthirster with a Great Axe and Argath King of Blades, all very fighty and dangerous there. The Great Unclean one with a Sword and taking Endless Gift, so he's just ridiculously hard to kill to the point of where not really being worth it. A 4+ Feel No Pain is pretty crazy on his already effective Toughness 13. There's a Lord of Change that takes the Staff for boosted psychic damage and also the Everstave to amp it up further. The character Great Unclean one in Rotigus for another very tanky and slightly more threatening model, and then finally Scarbrand for yet more cornate violence in a very big way. Seems pretty terrifying to have that little lot coming at you, particularly when they could be close range deep striking fairly easily, being able to do so for a 1 command point stratagem, and he won't be able to shoot them very easily in the early game thanks to Be'lakor. It takes some absolutely tiny minimal support, 1 squad of 10 Plague Marines for some sticky objectives, and then a Sloppity Bilepiper. I guess he could join the Plague Bearers, or could just be used as a lone model for some battle shock disruption, or even as a lone single base deep striker. I'm not sure what the plan was with him. In any case, looks pretty terrifying, though perhaps one of the lists that might take a surprising amount of skill to play, as it needs to destroy the enemy army very quickly, as there's not so much objective control here. Here's another take on a very successful Chaos Demon incursion, this one by Christopher Langdon making the top 8 at the London Grand Tournament. Only 5 Greater Demons in this one, and going for Kairos Fate Weaver, dropping Rotigus and the Bloodthirster, and instead going far heavier on the demonic support with some of the more normal options like Beasts, Flamers, Fleshhounds and Nurglings. Next up we've got the Aeldari, who seem to be one of the single strongest factions since the balance update, both very widely played and having lots of success at the tops of tournaments, plus good win rates as well. Out of their detachments, it's mainly the War Host and Aspect Host that seem to get played the most, though the Aspect Host seems to be more dominant currently and doing better, supporting some of their strongest units really quite well, giving them extra damage output, the ability to fade back into a Wave Serpent, and really quite a good shooting damage stratagem. This list by Joe Winter took 33rd at the London Grand Tournament, going undefeated, 4 wins and 1 draw. And this one's got a lot of the Aeldari staples. Fugan leading an enormous squad of Fire Dragons with a Fire Pike, excellent to be jumping in and out of that Wave Serpent, absolutely deleting something and then retreating back to safety. Jainzar with a small squad of Howling Banshees, charging a long way and then hitting hard with anti-infantry keywords, and Lycus with a squad of Powerblade Warp Spiders, being able to appear from nowhere a really long way away and then charge and get the first strike with some good damage profiles. Then beyond that, there's 3 squads of Dark Reapers, good general purpose, very long range damage output with the Exarch taking a missile launcher here, 2 squads of Swooping Hawks, both nice for utility and objectives, and also some stat damage on lighter infantry, 2 more squads of Warp Spiders taking the Deathweaver and Spinneret rifle, very big hitting shooting out of moving a really long way, some Storm Guardians for sticky objectives, 2 units of 5 Rangers for some fairly cheap and expendable infiltrators, and then 3 units of Corsair Void Reavers, fairly cheap with a little bit of damage threat and could potentially be expendable units to scrap for the midboard. Finally, there's also an Autarch Wayleaper here. I've not really seen them used quite so much. I presume he's either going to go with a squad of Swooping Hawks or with the Warp Spiders perhaps. He can hand out some free stratagems and also refresh some battle focus tokens, and does add a fair bit more melee to the squad as well. Overall seems like a very scary example of what the Aeldari can do. With the Aeldari having quite such a good time recently, it looks like I've talked about them a fair bit with several of their other lists here. I'll just cycle through them now. The highest placing one at the London Grand Tournament had Azamon and a small squad of Dire Avengers plus a Falcon, I guess, for them to jump in and out of. There was this one winning a tournament called Diag Doom that had 3 big squads of Swooping Hawks, seeming to be still popular despite the points increase. They could potentially do some fun critical hit combos with Lycus potentially. And then this one that brings Eldrad Ulthuan along for some extra command points, and having 2 squads of Fire Dragons with Fire Pikes in Wave Serpents. They're not taking any Dark Reapers and slightly fewer of the objective support style units. Seems like a good time for the Aeldari right now. Next up we have their Dark Kin, the Drukhari. They're shortly to have their new Codex points go live, so these are still indexed Drukhari lists. 2 of them did very well at the London Grand Tournament though. This one by Paulie Wallace going first 5 games undefeated and placing 19th overall. Pre-Codex, the Drukhari have been going slightly more Reaper's Wager versus Sky Splinter Assault, though both are decent enough. Reaper's Wager gives you reroll 1s to hit. Potentially if the Harlequins kill something, then you can get full rerolls to hit for the army for a fair bit, and then otherwise has some nice support with getting your units to melee and hitting extra hard when you get there. Interestingly, this one's led by a pair of Archons, each of which look like they're attached to a Court of the Archon. I guess one of them is just going with the single Court and maybe jumping into a Venom, and then the other one with Webway Walker perhaps being with a squad of Kabbalite Warriors, as that means that they can deep strike and get the jump on their opponents. I guess the Arc Raider one's going with the Court in the Venom, as then he can use his Arc Raider to allow them to scout. It seems he's the Warlord as well, so he could put down his Stratagem Disruption quite well. Then there's a Beastmaster with Conductor of Torment to allow you to potentially flip the wager back to Drukhari to get those rerolls again. Leader Hesperax with a big squad of Witches, maybe they'd be getting to the fight jumping out of the Raider. There's Urian Rakarth and some tanky Grotesques. Urian's really quite a pain to put down with his Resurrecting. 10 Helions for a fast moving fairly general purpose damage dealer with that damage too. 2 sets of Mandrakes which are rather nice with their infiltrating and then fading away to warp around the board doing secondaries if they need to. 2 sets of Scourges, one with Haywire and one with Dark Lance. That means that they can jump out, shoot things and then hide again, safe from reprisals. And then for transports as well as a Venom and Raider, there's also another Venom. I guess that might well be splitting the other squad of Kabbalite Warriors to give you some small objective securing units. I don't know if there's something more complex going on with the Court of the Archon though. Finally, there are some actual Harlequins in this one, an allied Harlequin troop of 11 models, so another quite big and scary melee threat there. Lots of devastating wounds with those Harlequin blades and some fancy pistol threat up close. Overall, between this one and the other one, Drukhari seemed to have quite a good time at the top tables of the London Grand Tournament. Alexandra Sacco took second, so going a massive 9-1 there. His list did have a fair few similarities, though some differences. There's a fast-moving lone operative Solitaire and Drazar with some Incubi here, a Kronos Parasite engine for some pain tokens, and a smaller troop squad with a Troop Master for some extra fighterness, and also Arc Raider to scout them into the midboard. Next up we've got the Tyranids, and they don't seem to have been performing quite so well since the balance update, maybe getting a bit codex crept by a bunch of other factions getting buffed. One person who did manage to do well with them though was Orion Adams, who used this list to take first at SA Nationals, going 5 games undefeated with Subterranean Assault. The Subterranean detachment is the one that they gained in the summer update, the one where the Burrower units create some tunnel markers to allow units to redeploy around the board very quickly, which can both be very nice for delivering melee at close range and also getting lines of sight with shooting. It also gives you reroll 1s to hit on everything as well, which is a pretty helpful damage buff. For the Burrower units here, it looks like there's 3 of them. A Trigon upgraded to the Trigon Prime, which is a pretty reasonable enhancement, lots of extra damage and gaining synapse, Then 2 units of Raveners will be able to burrow on and off the board, potentially set up quite a lot of tunnel markers over the course of the game, and they have got quite nice general purpose melee when they need to get stuck in as well. Then there's a big anti-tank battery with a Neuro Tyrant who can help out the Shadow of the Warp, and it looks like he's leading a squad of 6 Zoanthropes. It'd be quite nice to be able to get them guaranteed lines of sight on their target with the tunnel markers. The Neuro Tyrant both buffs the squad shooting and also gives them big guns never tire. Then for the rest of the damage output, it's really quite monster heavy. 2 Exocrines for their nice general purpose anti-elite firepower, 1 Tyrannofex with a big hitting rupture cannon, a Maleceptor for a sturdy one with a fair bit of damage that's fairly happy to be on the front lines with its debuff rules, a Haruspex which is extra nice in this detachment due to being able to deliver it to a 6-inch charge, and finally a Norn Emissary, just a generally pretty big and mighty bug, getting a 5+ feel no pain when on a mid-board objective. Then there's some Tyranid objective support, a Biovore for farming out the Spore mines for board control and secondaries, some cheap Neurogaunts, which have quite a lot of wounds as a cheap placeholder style unit, 1 Neurolictor, getting a little cheaper in the last balance pass, and he can help out with some objective things, plus maybe debuff enemies that are battle shocked, and some Gargoyles for fast moving OC that can potentially reach interesting areas of the board with their move shoot move. Overall seems like quite a lot of good Tyranid damage dealers here, with a good detachment to support them. Next up, the Genestealer Cults took a fair few nerfs in the last balance pass. They did come from a position of strength, with pre-nerf Host of Ascension seeming to be one of the best performing detachments in the entire game. After the nerfs, they're one of the notably lesser played armies. It's them and Deathwatch and then Imperial Agents at the lesser played end of the 40k meta. But one person who managed to do rather well with them was Andy Mitten, going for one at the LGT, and this one going with Host of Ascension, the one that was getting played lots before with the big damage buffs at reserves, and also a fair few interesting guerrilla warfare things like some focal damage buffs or the return to reserve stratagem. In this one we've got a Primus with a chink in their armour. He is still going to be a big hitting unit alongside a squad of 20 neophytes. They're not quite as powerful as he was when he got to reroll all hit rolls. Then it looks like there's 2 other blocks of 20 neophytes, and they're both being led by Benefactors. That'll give them lethal hits plus some anti-tank shooting from their own profiles, and one has Assassination Edicts giving you a further buff against character squads. Between the detachment benefits, the marking of a pair of Achilles Ridge Runners here, and some stratagems, they're going to hit incredibly hard at reserves. Then we've got 2 scary units of hybrid metamorphs. They went down for some reason in the balance pass despite already being fairly good. So 2 squads of 10 of them with hand flamers and their big hitting anti-infantry damage, and they look like they're both led by the Biophagus, one of which is a Prowling Adjutant for some reactive moves. Then there's a Nexos who I'd guess would join the Primus' unit for some cheaper stratagems, a Goliath truck which I'd guess would transport one of the hybrid metamorphs and Biophagus combos, and then a whole bunch of skirmish and objective support style units, some infiltrating pure stream Genestealers that can move very fast, some scouting Atalan Jackals, each of which taking a mining laser. All of those units can be really quite cheap to recycle for resurgence points as well. Then 4 sets of Acolyte hybrids finally, 3 sets of the ones with the hand flamers, quite nice for clearing enemy infantry with bursts of flamer fire, and 1 set of the Acolytes with the auto pistols and mining weapons. They have sticky objectives which could be handy to have in the home field, never mind their actual damage output which could be pretty big on the countercharge. Good to see they're still having some success, though it does look like the average Genestealer Cult players aren't quite so enthused about their faction currently, not so many of them showing up to grand tournaments, though the ones that are do seem to be using a whole variety of detachments. Next up we've got the Necrons. They seem to have been doing really quite well since the balance pass, win rates on the upper end of Warhammer 40k right now. This list by Andy Quaz Cohen was used to get into the top 8 at the London Grand Tournament, going the first 7 games undefeated. And it's using the Star Shatter arsenal, so the one that buffs the Necron vehicle units and also gives you extra damage against objective markers. It's interesting to see both the Silent King and the Triarch Praetorians, both of which dropped in points in the last balance update. The Silent King traded off a special rule, though given the points decrease it still felt like he was probably overall stronger. He can still provide some big rerolls, and it looks like he's supported by Psychomancer with the Chrono Impotence fields. That'll make him just ridiculously tough, and there's even access to a -1 to wound stratagem if it's needed too. The Psychomancer might be able to help out debuff some enemy units to stop them scoring points at a critical point as well, and will just need to be hidden and kept safe. Otherwise there's a Catacomb Command Barge with the mini Silent King enhancement, with rerolls of 1 to hit and wound with Dread Majesty. They could be buffing the Doomsday Arcs, which will really quite like that buff. And there's a cheap scouting Triarch Stalker that could also mark targets for them as well. Then there's 2 infiltrating sets of flayed ones to fight for the mid-board and screen back enemy scouts and infiltrators themselves. 2 sets of 5 Triarch Praetorians with their Rods of the Covenant. Cool to see them getting some play after their points decrease, Looks like 18 points was enough to tip the balance. 2 individual Locust Destroyers, which are quite nice, screening cheap placeholder units with a little bit of damage output. And then interestingly enough, 3 individual Scorpet Lords, just relying on their raw might to get the job done without a squad for them to lead. I guess potentially being a nice enough cheap trading unit that's not too hard to hide as they move up. It certainly feels like a solidly vehicle heavy Star Shatter Arsenal list. And really quite cool to see some Triumph Praetorians getting used here. They have been one of the units that just felt like they've been underwhelming for a very long time. Otherwise, for another example I talked about for Necrons, here's an Awakened Dynasty one. This one by Bill Patterson going 5-0 at the Doomhammer Open. This one also having the Silent King, but just a whole bunch of Necron interesting stuff. There's the Void Dragon, Illuminor Zeraz, 2 sets of Scorpet Lords leading Scorpet Destroyers, a Technomancer with Wraiths with the Netherrealm Casket, a Canoptet Reanimator to patch things up again, and then a whole bunch of Necron Objective Skirmishers. Next up we've got the Orks, and they were certainly a faction that could have done with a bit of a lift prior to the balance update, and so far it does seem they've been a fair bit more fairly balanced since, maybe not standout crazy strong, but enough that they're winning plenty more games and are placing high in some tournaments. This list by Brian Sipe placed 14th at the London Grand Tournament, going first 5 games undefeated, and as with the most commonly played Orks list recently, it is a Warhorde list, so extra violence in melee with sustained hits, and some really quite helpful stratagems with both getting to melee, a -1 to wound, and sustained hits on a 5+ when you get there if you need it. Ghazghkull Thraka is in pride of place. I'd guess that he's embracing his ability to attach to a squad of 10 Orc boys, and he can attach 2 characters to the same squad, so I'd guess he might be alongside the big mech with the Power Claw and Follow Me lads, and that gives you a pretty enormous massive unit that can get where it wants to be dead fast. Follow Me lads gives you an extra +2 movement, and the mech allows you to reroll advance rolls, which could be pretty massive in the turn of the war when you get to advance and charge. They could also use the here we go for a +2 to advance and charge. Between all that, this unit could move incredibly fast indeed. Then we've got 2 regular war bosses. I'd guess they'd be leading the 2 squads of 5 knobs, so 2 squads with the power claws and using the +1 to hit extra nastily. I guess in theory they could also join the Breaker Boys as well. I feel like they maybe have more critical massive damage that they should be able to get by against the targets on their own perhaps. And it looks like a lot of that melee violence is going to be loaded up into 2 battle wagons. I guess the Knobs and Breaker Boys, plus as many of the Flash Gits mobs that can fit. There's 2 big squads of 10 of them, and then 1 squad of 5. That's some pretty enormous high volume close range firepower there, with a sheer amount of damage too. Kind of interesting to see quite such a big focus on them in the Warhorde list. I feel like it was a bit less common to see big units of 10 of them there rather than squads of 5. They definitely can still fight pretty effectively in close combat too though. Then finally there's 2 squads of Gretchen for some objective support and rustling up some command points, and then a squad of Burner Boys, I guess a fairly cheap way of dealing with some light infantry and quite a nice expendable unit. Nice to see the Orcs doing fairly well again, and seems like Games Workshop's balance changes have made an impact for this one. Ghazghkull Thraka leading boys has been enjoyed, and the big squads of 10 Flash Gits getting a little cheaper would have helped out this one too. Next up we've got Tau Empire, and here's a Montcar list by Will B, who used this to take 10th at the London Grand Tournament. Tau really having a whole ton of viable options though. Most of their detachments really quite playable, and they got some nice buffs to some of their slightly more struggling units in the balance pass, particularly helping out their Crisis Suit combos. This list is a Montcar one though, so moves nice and fast with the assault keyword, and when guided you get lethal hits against your target, which is quite a big damage buff against tough stuff. There's also some good supporting stratagems to help out with AP, and a couple of the enhancements are here as well. Strike swiftly with a Firesight team to scout some things forward. I was corrected in a previous video that it's probably some of the damage dealers to get some lines of sight, and a Recruit Warshaper to hand out Strategic Conqueror to put extra OC into the midboard. Then interestingly enough, there's no stealth suits at all in this one for their reroll ones to hit and wound, but just loads of firepower. 3 broadsides all in one huge unit with high yield missile pods, so extra good for any focal stratagems there, and the high yield missile pods will get on well with lethal hits. Then there's lots of ion weapon firepower that goes well with lethal hits as well. A Ghost Kill with an Ion Raker that can lurk in the backfield and be safe from being shot. 2 Hammerhead gunships with ion cannons, and then 2 Riptides with the improved ion accelerators, now being able to get up to strength 10. Commander Shadowsun can give a lot of that rerolls, so I guess doesn't have quite as much requirement for the stealth suits there. There's a big contingent of Pathfinders. One of them starts in the midboard infiltrating, then it looks like the other 2 move up in Devilfish. Seems that they've been preferred and are basically taking the roles that Breachers might often have this time around. They can hit pretty hard with all those ion weapons. And then finally there's some Tau objective support, Groot Carnivores for sticky objectives, Vespid Stingwings jumping on and off the board and doing secondary objectives, a lone screening Crutox Rider that's a nice expendable 40-point model, and a cheap unit of Crude Hounds that could be a nice trading style unit. and it could have a bit of objective control with that Warshaper with Strategic Conqueror. Lots of very hard-hitting firepower there, backed up by quite a lot of good objective support. Interesting to see no stealth suits in this one. Finally, we've got the Space Dwarves of the Leagues of Votann. This one's a Need-Guard Oathbound list, the one that allows you to farm some yield points for getting kills, and then plug all of those acquired yield points into some pretty powerful stratagems, potentially getting things like sustained hits too, or lots of extra AP and melee. This list was by James Marsden, who used it to place 26th at the London Grand Tournament, again going the first 5 games undefeated. In this one, looks like we've got a Brockir Iron Master, who I'd guess will be leading those Thunderkin with the conversion beamers. They've got the possibility of getting sustained hits and maybe sustained hits too here, which could make their firepower just absolutely ridiculously devastating. And then an Iron Hair Champion with the Ancestral Crest, potentially allowing you to swap a yield point for a command point reroll. I guess leading one of those Iron Hair Hearthguard squads and teleporting them into battle. There's 2 squads of them, maybe the other one jumping out of a Hecaton Land Fortress, unless they both are, and armed with plasma guns and concussion gauntlets to do quite a lot against sort of medium infantry with their damage 2 attacks. There's a unit of 10 Hearthkin warriors who I'd guess will be lurking in the backfield, perhaps providing some protection to Uthar the Destined. They can mark the home objective for sticky objectives, and then Uthar the Destined can hand out some discounted stratagems nearby, and there are really quite easy ones to spend ones on here. As well as sustained hits, there's also a reroll ones to hit and wound when you're shooting, which could be pretty good on multiple units. Some of those could potentially be the Hecaton Land Fortresses. There's 2 of these, one with a rail cannon and one with conversion beamer, both really quite big and chunky, and would also enjoy the reactive reprisal and the void armor here. There's a squad of Hernkin Jaegers who are split with a Capricus carrier. 5 of them will infiltrate into the midboard and do some expendable screening things, the other ones following along in the scouting transport. There's a squad of 6 Ironkin Steeljacks with melee weapons. They seem like a good unit to march up the board and scrap for the midboard. There's 2 units of Chthonian Berserks. I guess they'll be getting into battle with one of the land fortresses as a battlefield bunker to charge out of. Really quite hard-hitting melee. 1 squad takes the axes and 1 the gauntlets. There's 2 Chthonian Earthshakers with tremor shells, giving you a little bit of indirect fire to clear out some lighter infantry. Maybe good against some Aeldari perhaps. And finally 1 cheap scouting unit of Hernkin Pioneers, a trading unit with a little bit of damage threat with those autocannons. Overall, it's really quite a big mix of Votann units, having the majority of the datasheets and the codex represented here. Pretty fun to see a good mix of them doing so well. I feel like maybe the smaller squads of Ironhair Hearthguard are a slightly more unusual choice here. I feel like I've more commonly seen them with a big unit buffed by a Carl. Here's another take on the Leagues of Votann using their Transport Brandfast attachment. This one by Guy Grimm and placing second at Diag Doom. This one goes heavy with 3 Sagittars here to transport some Chthonian Berserks and split some Hearthkin Warriors, an extra Land Fortress and more Thunderkin. They'll really like this attachment with the sustained hits on their SP conversion beamers. It does seem that a fair few more people are playing and having success with the Need-Guard Oathband though, at least so far. With the Xenos armies talked through, that's just about it for this one though. Let me know your thoughts as to any of the army lists. I look forward to any further insights in unexpected ways and how they might play. And if you spot any corrections at all, let me know down in the comments. If I manage to make any errors with these, I'll correct them there. Finally, before I go, I'll just cycle back to today's video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold and briefly talk through their range of magnetic carry cases. As mentioned, they've got a sale on for the next few days if you're seeing this early. Here's a look at roughly how many miniatures their trays can hold. On their steel trays you can fit around about 90 odd 25mm bases or around 6 knight armigers. And then those trays are stacked up within cases of different sizes. Here's the smallest one, which is the Mag Case Mini, $70 or £62 while on sale. The prices include delivery, but there might be some VAT or sales tax depending on where you might be around the world. Even in the small one though, there's some room for some big tanks and Terminators. Then there's the more standard size one, around about £100 or $115. This one quite a lot taller than the previous one, as you can see by the Chaos Knight on the ground floor. They all come with a few magnets to mount to bases. I'll leave the dimensions of the cases here on the screen. Then there's the extra big one, basically 2 of the previous mounted side by side. A bit more expensive, though there are some options for more or fewer of these steel trays depending on how many you want. In any case, this one should be big enough for entire collections. We also have that competitive terrain set as well if you're in the market for some MDF stuff there. This one's got a particularly big discount if bought alongside any mag case. If you're interested in them though, then check them out, links down in the video description. A big thank you to them for sponsoring this video. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel and you'd like to help support their creation, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.